Do we think now that the Mk 8.5 Golf, the Mk8 facelift, finally eclipses the 7.5, which for a lot of people is still the benchmark Golf? Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now, over recent weeks, some of you may have seen reports on the long-awaited Mk8 Golf facelift. Well, as one of the biggest channels on YouTube for Mk8 Golf content, we simply had to get in on the act as well. But rather than regurgitate everything you've probably already seen, we digested all those press releases and images to bring to you in this video, hopefully the most definitive guide to the Mk8 Golf facelift. Now, don't mistake this for a simple nip and tuck. There is an awful lot resting on these tweaks, because when the Mk8 Golf came out, it received a lot of criticism from the motoring press. Some of it justified, but some of it was actually factually incorrect. We'll talk about that later. Could this facelift make the Mk 8.5 Golf finally eclipse what in the eyes of many is the best Golf so far, the 7.5? Well, hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a really good idea about that. Before we get started, I just want to remind you guys how you can support the channel. The easiest way to do that is simply to subscribe. We're still getting loads of views from non-subscribers, and it's brilliant to get those views, but it'd be even more brilliant if you could subscribe as well. I'm sure you know how to do that by now. Also, if you haven't yet seen the video in which I fit the Bilstein B6 shock absorbers to my Mk 7.5 Golf GTD estate, then please check that out. I'll put a link to it in the description of the video below. Now, the first thing to point out is that this visually is a very minor facelift. I'd say from what we've seen so far, particularly for the GTI, it's less significant than the change from Mk 7 to 7.5. This might be because VW are still in the process of delivering brand new Mk 8s to customers that were ordered as far back as 2022, and understandably don't want buyers complaining that their brand new car already looks out of date. We've even got a number of R20 years coming through in 2024 that were supposedly to celebrate the 20 years of VWR in 2022. And you can bet VW do not want those owners to cancel, because they are some very expensive cars. Okay, let's start with the inside, where the most significant change has taken place. The Mk8 Golf facelift was previewed at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in early January, which seems like a strange place to preview a car's facelift. But the reason it was there was because Volkswagen is the first volume car manufacturer to integrate ChatGPT into their voice control. Now, if you don't use voice control, this probably means very little, and even if you do, it's probably a bit of a gimmick.
According to ChatGPT, to make butter chicken, marinate chicken pieces with yolk.
I'll be coming over to your place.
What we really want to see, though, are the changes to the infotainment system, and the good news is that the hardware and software is completely brand new. The central touchscreen in the basic version will be a 10.4-inch unit, with higher spec versions using a 12.9-inch screen. In the Mk 8, we had 8.25-inch and 10-inch screens, so the smaller screen is still bigger than the bigger screen in the Mk 8. So I guess that's pretty good news. It's the larger screen that's been in the press images the most, and for good reason. It looks significantly different to the old one. But at present, it's unclear which models will get this as standard. The good news is, probably more for journalists than owners, is that the slider controls for volume and temperature just underneath the screen are now backlit. This never bothered me, and looking at forums, it doesn't really bother actual owners, but the media complaints clearly had an effect. Or did they? Maybe Volkswagen planned this for the facelift from day one when the Mk 8 was launched back in 2020. We'll probably never know. A very significant change, but one that's very easy to overlook if you've never owned one, is that the shortcut bar, which was key to using the old system properly and previously required a swipe down to access, this is now permanently visible at the top of the screen. So journalists, take note. As with the pre-facelift car, you can program these buttons to do whatever you want. So if you want to toggle the traction control, which most owners don't do, then it's just going to be one press now to do that. It's not buried deep in menus, and even with a pre-facelift car, it didn't have to be. You just had to configure these shortcuts. Something a bit strange, which I'm mildly concerned about, is that the home button has moved from the driver's side of the screen to the middle. On some other cars, I think it's Skoda Octavia, it's actually on the wrong side of the screen, which means you can't really press it very easily from the driver's seat in a right-hand drive car. So putting it in the middle, it's better than being on the wrong side completely, but I think maybe it's going to be a bit of a lean forward to press situation. We'll see when we actually get behind the wheel. The haptic buttons have gone now from the steering wheel. Some of the images are a bit confusing. On some they look matte like they do on the older cars. On some they look piano black, and I'm pretty sure they're piano black now. And this matches the piano black center console, which became standard in 2023 on the pre-facelift Mark 8 and is carried over to the facelift. Like it or not, it will scratch, but it does look a little bit more expensive. The bad news is we've still got hard door cappings on the rear doors. Big thanks to Robert at Autogefühl for pointing that out. Now onto GTI specific things. Well, the good news is we've got more power, quite a big hike compared to, say, 7 to 7.5. The base model GTI is still in the range, and its power goes up from 245 to 265. So that's basically the same as the Mark 7 Golf GTI Club Sport if you don't include the overboost. Bad news is, though, even with all that power, they haven't upgraded the brake disc. So the press photos of the King's Red car show that it's still got the crappy non-performance pack calipers. Now, this is probably due to the GTI base model having 17-inch wheels as standard in some markets. I'm very surprised they didn't go to the Performance Pack 340mm, seeing as the Mark 8 Club Sport had bigger brakes than that, so it wasn't like it was going to be treading on the Club Sport's toes. Speaking about the Club Sport, there's nothing official that's been revealed so far, but personally I doubt it's going to go beyond 300 horsepower for two reasons: traction and emissions. Auto Express said that the camouflage car from the Consumer Electronics Show was the Club Sport, and if you look at it, it has got the big rear spoiler, but the key difference on that car is that it's got a much more aggressive rear diffuser than the Mark 8 versions. Could this actually be the bespoke special edition GTI that Volkswagen are building to celebrate 50 years of golf, not 50 years of GTI, because that's 2 years later. Let's hope they haven't run out of ideas for 2026. The manual GTI has been deleted. Well, that was actually deleted a while ago for the Mark 8, so it's not really news. And to be honest, I don't think anybody really cares apart from journalists. Looks-wise, when I first saw the shots of the King's Red car in the studio without camo on it, I thought it was a Polo because it's doing that thing that the new Polo does, where it kind of looks like a GTI, but it's actually a bit taller and narrower and doesn't have the stance. Maybe it's just a bit of unfortunate photography there, because all the metal panels continue to be exactly the same. Now we need to talk about the GTI badges, which Volkswagen have decided to now put on the door. No, they didn't have a load left over from Mark 8, so they didn't get round to producing, that they had to get rid of. The reason why every single Performance 8.5 now looks like the owner has got a bit enthusiastic on eBay is a simple one. Blame the GTE hybrid. Yeah, bloody electric cars. This has got a charging port in the front left wing, which meant that the Mark 8 version couldn't get the dagger badges. If you look at the Mark 8, actually, I've only just noticed this myself, it doesn't have the dagger badges and it looks quite plain on the side of it. So instead of redesigning the badges to work on the door, they've just stuck the grille badges normally seen on the front and rear of the car onto the front doors. So we've got used to emissions regulations affecting the way our cars perform and how they sound. Now we can blame the chasing of low emissions for making them look too. Now on to the wheels. Well, the red car was wearing 19s and they look pretty much identical to the ones on an Alfa Brera. I did read a press release somewhere that said that this style of wheel hadn't been used on a Golf since the Mark 6. So by that, I assume Volkswagen is saying they're an evolution of the Monza wheel, which started on the Mark 5. Maybe they're going to call it Monza 3. Who knows? But to me, they look a lot more like an Alfa wheel than a traditional GTI wheel. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm surprised and a little disappointed to see the adaptive cruise radar is back in the front bumper like the Mark 7. Is that because it works better, or is it because Volkswagen are forcing upon us a new illuminated Volkswagen Roundel that sits in the middle of the grille? Well, if it is the latter, then we're probably going to regret that when a pheasant headbutts the radar, because they're very expensive to buy and they're very expensive to have realigned at Volkswagen. What I have also noticed is that there is a little camera sitting above the radar, which we've seen on other cars for the area view parking system, and that's because this is now fitted for the first time to a Golf. Do you really need it on such a compact car, though, is the question. Now, back to the illuminated Volkswagen badge. I read a report that said this was because of a change in advertising law, and I looked a little bit more into it, and I found out that in Germany, an illuminated badge is seen as advertising, plus it's also seen as very distracting. But recently, some scientists did a survey of how distracting that would be, and it wasn't actually seen to be that distracting compared to all the other things we're used to on cars now, like illuminated light bars, etc. So suddenly it became available, and Volkswagen are now fitting it to the Mk8 facelift. Also on the King's Red car in the studio, we can see black mirror casings, and this means that for the first time on the base GTI, a black roof is going to be available as an option. It did appear as an option for a short period on the Mk8 Club Sport, sometime about a year or so ago, and it was also standard on the Club Sport 45, but this is the first time we've seen that available on the base GTI. At the back, the GTI actually looks pretty much identical to the old car, so it's got the same diffuser, the same size tailpipes. It's got slightly more intricate rear lights, but the pressings of the panels are identical, so it's just really the elements within the lights a little bit more high-tech, and that's probably not standard on all the models anyway, so it's quite possible if you didn't have the optional extra rear lights, you'd have a rear end that looks identical to that of a Mk8. Apparently, the GTI, for the first time, will get genuine carbon fibre, and that sounds really exciting. They were boasting this, though, for the R20 that came out at the end of 2022, and I've got to say, I've seen fake carbon fibre that looks a lot more impressive than the supposedly real stuff in that car, so I'm ready to be disappointed with that. Talking about the R, well, they're probably not talking about the R very much when it comes to the facelift, because there are quite a few to be delivered, much more than GTIs, I gather from my contacts at dealerships, so they don't want to risk cancelling orders. There was a preview at the GP ice race at Zell am See Airport in Austria, where I was actually in July when the weather was completely different, although there actually wasn't that much snow this year, but compared to last year, there was enough snow for the event to take place. I've got to say, the most interesting picture of that whole event was the picture of the chap, Reinhold, who looks absolutely knackered. He must have been under a lot of pressure to get that car to that event, and also he's got to worry about the whole R brand being electrified by 2030. So mate, get a bit more sleep, please. The car's clearly still on esterils, so they're carried over to the facelift R. The headlamp edges are camouflaged as well as the bodywork, but I wouldn't expect too much because that was also the same as the GTI that was at the Consumer Electronics Show. So we've probably got exactly the same as the GTI, just with blue. Now, some general things to point out. We've still got the manual bonnet stays, even though it's possible to retrofit one, and even those Mk8s in some markets have got the telescopic one. VW continued, even though everybody's been moaning about that, to fit the manual bonnet stay. I'm hoping there's a legislation reason why they've had to do that. It's not the kind of thing Volkswagen say in a press release, but it'd be really good to know if you know why they've carried on with that. While you're looking under the bonnet, have a look at how little paint there is. There's like a flick of overspray on the tops of the wings, and after that, it's all the undercoat. So, yeah, doesn't look really good and doesn't look how I'd expect a Golf to look under the bonnet. On the plus side, there is a new colour called Ice Crystal Blue, which was previewed on the estate. Let's hope that means there are some more interesting colours to join the range, because we've really not had much to talk about colour-wise with the Mk8, and a few more colours for the R would be good as well. And it's also worth pointing out that the plug-in hybrid, presumably the GTE, will have a range of up to 100 kilometres, which is half as much again as the GTE Mk8 has. So that's a pretty usable range of about 60 miles. So yeah, not bad. Okay, so do we think now that the Mk8.5 Golf, the Mk8 facelift, finally eclipses the 7.5, which for a lot of people is still the benchmark Golf? Well, until I've played with that infotainment system and I can be 100% sure it's completely bug-free, particularly on our right-hand drive cars, which seem to get more problems than the left-hand drive cars in other markets, I'm still not willing to commit. As you probably know, I was a big fan of the Mk8 before. Primarily that was because of its dynamics. So if the dynamics have stayed where they are, but we have less bugs and an infotainment system that is nicer to use, then I think it's going to be a pretty close match, but I will reserve judgment until I've got behind the wheel. I've lived with a 7.5 now for a long time. I've also got a Mark 7. I didn't actually have those when I had my Mark 8, and now I appreciate these older cars a lot more. And yes, the Mark 8s and 8.5 still don't feel as well made. They don't feel as Volkswagen as the 7.5s, but if they can nail the software and they can retain the sharper dynamics that we got with the newer car, then I think maybe I could be convinced. But I've got to point out, when I bought my Mark 8 Club Sport, I paid £32,000 for it, brand new. I wouldn't have paid 39, which I think is where it ended up before it was taken out of production. So pricing is going to play a really big part in this, and let's hope finally we're going to get more supply than demand, like is generally the case with new cars, and there will be some deals to be had. So yeah, am I going to buy one? Not sure as yet, but as ever guys, keep subscribing, keep commenting, and see you for the next one very soon.